Welcome back to Make Your Life Healthy. I'm Patricia Sternkorb, and on this last segment of our program, and I always wonder, where did my time go? I always have so much to tell you, and it goes so fast. We're going to be talking about super processed foods, ultra processing, which means that it is processed to the hilt so much that you shouldn't even be eating it because it's so bad for you. We start thinking about processed food, and did you know that 90% of all dollars spent at the grocery store, 90% of all dollars spent on food, that doesn't count toilet paper and detergent, but of food products, 90% are spent for processed foods. And I was just amazed at that number. 90% of my dollars, because I'm one of the general public, I'm spending it on processed foods. It's so bad for us. Processed foods really came into being in the late 1970s and early 1980s when more and more convenience foods started appearing. Things like cake mixes that they didn't have before. Remember, they used to have those little Jiffy mixes, and we all thought it was so great because they were like cornbread and one-layer cakes. Well, now, of course, it's expanded and expanded. Everything that you have is processed. Who ever heard of buying pancake mix in a box? You just used to have to mix up your eggs and milk and flour together and get it. Now you add it, and everything is added into it except the water, and it's all got processed foods, and it's got extra chemicals added. Nothing on your store shelves is all pure. It all has additives into it. In fact, there are 6,000 different additives in our grocery store foods. 6,000 different things that can be in your food. It's mind-boggling. So, processed foods are just horrible. We know, of course, that things like processed meats, which we just talked about, are really bad for you. We know that artificial sweeteners are bad. We know that dye is bad for it. All of these different things. We also know that when you add those things to your diet, it also makes you crave that same thing over and over again, especially things like artificial sweeteners. And then another culprit that we have in our diet, which is fructose or corn syrup. Any of the things that have a sugar base to it makes you crave sugar more. It makes you crave more and more of the sugar and the fructose. There's no getting away from it. In fact, sugar is so predominant. I was just looking at a bag of chips that one of our camera people was eating, and it even had sugar in the chips. Can you imagine? It even has sugar in it. Sugar is everywhere, and it's really, really bad for us. They put sugar, in fact, in all of the things from baby formulas to baby food. They've added sugar into it. We're really teaching our kids from a very early age to have that taste of sugar in their mouths, and then they can't get away from it. When they did recent studies with rats, they found out that when they removed the sugar and the fructose and the highly processed corn syrup away from the rats, they had the same effects as if they were on drugs, and they took it away from them. We're addicted to it. And we talked about that addiction earlier in today's program. It's really a bad thing for us to do and to be addicted to this. But in addition to that, all of the other processing that they put into your foods, it goes all the way back to when they're growing it. They're now genetically modifying different kinds of foods, and in fact, of the kind of things that are grown, about 50% of them in our country and in other countries are coming from genetically modified things. And if you aren't familiar with this term, what it means is that the products that are grown in the ground, let's say that it's corn, because that's really where it started, they started using chemicals to get rid of the weeds. Well, it was killing the corn as well. So they started genetically modifying the corn so that it was resistant to the weed killer. So they could put the weed killer on the corn, it would kill the weeds but not kill the corn. Okay, well, consequently, of course, that chemical is still getting into our corn. It's making it resistant to not killing it, but it doesn't make it not resistant to killing us because we're still getting the chemicals. So they're genetically modifying all different kinds of foods, all the way down to salmon, and other different kinds of meats, of course, any kind of food that they can add chemicals to avoid one thing. It's supposed to help it to stay healthier, but in essence, it's causing all kinds of problems. And because it's such a recent thing that they started doing, just back in the 1980s and 90s, they don't even know the long-term ramifications of genetically modifying our food. So it's just bad for us. Processed food in general. On one recent study, they found out that 25% of our sugar is taken in the form of breakfast food. I just talked a little bit ago on children ages 9 to 13, 90% of their sugar intake for the day is in their breakfast food, because sometimes it's donuts, sometimes it's Pop-Tarts, sometimes it's whatever that they're eating, their cereal, 90% of their sugar intake. So they're eating the processed food, they're not eating the things that are healthy for them. And what happens is that not only does it fill us up, because it really does, it makes you feel full, it satisfies your hunger, it doesn't allow you to eat the things that you need to be eating. So when we're spending all of our money at the grocery store on processed foods, that means we're not spending our money on healthy foods. We're not spending it on fresh fruits and vegetables. We're spending it on things that we should not be eating. And we really need to add those things back. We're not getting the nutrition, we're not getting the vitamins, we're not getting all of the things in our diets that keep us healthy. And so the super processing of it is taking everything else away and adding things back in. This is the one thing that they've really started seeing, is that not only do we genetically modify the foods, and not only do we chemically enhance them, but in order to then process the food in our bodies, we have to add something else to it in order to counteract the something else that they've already added. So it's just a big cycle. Instead of only having 1 or 2 things on the back of the bottle of what's in it, now there's 10 things on it, and things you can't even pronounce. And my big rule is, if you can't pronounce it, you shouldn't be eating it. But it goes true for everything. If you just take a look at what's on the back of the label and find out what you're eating, it would scare you to death. We do not need to be eating it. Nitrates, we talked about nitrites, sodium, MSG, fructose, on and on and on the list goes. They're genetically modifying our food to the point that they found out over the course of time, and where they really started seeing it is when they started using C rations, which they used during the wars, and the people who were eating those long term were had bad effects. They were having health problems, and it was because of the preservative that they put in those C rations. So they started saying, what is this linked to? What is it that we're adding to it? And of course, they've changed those things and added other things to it. So stop eating those kind of things and start eating some healthy foods. One of the ways you can do it is to eat raw foods, and that means lettuce and greens and peppers and anything, vegetables that you can eat that's raw. It's a great way to do it. The other thing is to get rid of the processed foods as fast as you can, get them out of your system, and start eating healthy. So words of wisdom for the day is learn to cook, teach your kids to cook, and make things from scratch. And that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on Make Your Life Healthy, and we'll be back next week for another whole hour worth of good information for you so that you can make your life healthy. Bye-bye.